HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents, live from New York, the complete uncensored history of Saturday Night Live, as told by its stars, writers, and guests. Edited by James Andrew Miller and Tom Shales. Read by Paul Woodson and Christina Delaine. It's a turnaround jump shot. It's everybody jump start. It's every generation throws a hero up the pop charts. Paul Simon, The Boy in the Bubble. Preface to the 2015 edition. It's highly doubtful that anyone associated with the premiere of Saturday Night Live in 1975 imagined that the show would still be around 10, 15, or 25 years later. Some of those present at the creation, however, were definitely still around on February 15, 2015. And they, along with dozens of other alumni from TV's longest-running comedy show, returned to Studio 8H to celebrate its epical 40th anniversary. The special, which spanned more than 3.5 hours of prime time on NBC, truly had something for everybody who'd ever loved or even liked the program, and it also, true to form, had something for everybody to bitch about. Lorne Michaels, the show's creator and its producer for all but 5 of those 40 years, was determined to invite everybody associated with SNL in any significant way to attend the TV special and a splashy after-gala, and he gave orders to the producers and writers of the special to include as many celebrated or notorious highlights from 4 decades of SNL as possible. Blocks of memory-stirring moments were interlaced with new versions of SNL classics, all of them combined in an astonishing whirlwind ride, one that demonstrated how SNL could sail through myriad changes in American trends, fads, fashions, attitudes, institutions, social realities, political movements, and technology, and manage to remain young, even as the rest of us grew older. The show had begun, actor Robert De Niro noted, back when TV was still watched on TV. When if you missed the show on Saturday night, then you missed the show. The special was divided loosely into thematic blocks: 40 years of politics on SNL, hosted by Jack Nicholson; 40 years of sports on SNL, hosted by Derek Jeter and Peyton Manning, and even included a new rap song by Andy Samberg and Adam Sandler to accompany a montage of breaks, times when actors broke up laughing. In reviewing the special, internet writers and bloggers and social media practitioners dubbed it uneven, a charge that the series has faced since its inception. The show was always bound to be uneven, partly because it envelops and displays so many different kinds of comedy, intermingling political satire with shameless slapstick and ribald, or just plain dirty, farce. On the 40th anniversary show, the clips whizzed by with once familiar sayings and catchphrases popping back into the collective consciousness. "I would like to feed your fingertips to the Wolverines," Michael O'Donoghue to John Belushi, and vice versa from the first episode ever aired. "Guess what? I've got a fever, and the only prescription is more cowbell," Christopher Walken as the Bruce Dickinson to Will Ferrell, Jimmy Fallon, and others in a classic sketch from April 2000. "Wow, that's good bass," Lorraine Newman to Dan Aykroyd in a reenactment of Aykroyd's Bass-O-Matic commercial spoof from the first season. "Remember when you were with the Beatles? That was awesome," Chris Farley as an inept but lovable interviewer to Paul McCartney in February 1993. "I can see Russia from my house," Tina Fey as vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin in 2008. "It was my understanding that there would be no math," Chevy Chase as Gerald R. Ford in a presidential debate from the first season. "I can't believe I'm losing to this guy," John Lovitz as Michael Dukakis in response to a burst of gibberish from Dana Carvey as George Bush in a presidential debate from 1988. "Well, it got a big laugh, but did it get the right laugh?" Mike Myers as Lorne Michaels in a Wayne's World reunion with Dana Carvey, written for the 40th anniversary special. And yes, Generalissimo Francisco Franco was still dead, as Chevy Chase had regularly reported in the first season of Weekend Update mock newscasts, back when the cast was known as the Not Ready for Primetime Players. "There they are, all my friends," said John Belushi, made up to look like the old man he would never live to be and pointing to headstones on a cemetery hill in Tom Schiller's poignant 1977 short film, Don't Look Back in Anger. All his old cohorts from SNL had preceded him in death, Belushi said, scoffing at suspicions that he would be the first to go. Even SNL detractors would have to admit that the range represented on the special verged on awe-inspiring. It was that breadth of scope and style that helped explain the 40-year run in the first place. That and the fact that the show perpetually replenished itself on stage and in the writer's room, launching the careers of many an extraordinary performer in the process. The assembled glitterati watching the special in Studio 8H represented a cross-section of the pop culture elite, just as the performers constituted a remarkable roll call of comedy royalty. They came together to honor a program that had started in the minor tributaries of television and soon became a torrent in the mainstream. Among those seated in the audience that February night was Al Franken, once a Peck's bad boy of television on SNL, now grown up with a vengeance. As a writer and performer, he had maliciously insulted network president Fred Silverman in a sketch for a 1979 episode of the show, and now he was serving his second term as a U.S. Senator from Minnesota. How things change. Bill Murray, as lounge singer Nick Ocean, sang new and gratuitous lyrics to the theme from Jaws, with Paul Schaefer at the piano. "Jaws, you took me and made me part of you, you bastard, Jaws." Eddie Murphy, who'd refused to take part in the show's 25th anniversary, made a non-comic appearance to say that all was forgiven and that, "I will always love this show," though he refused to do an impression of scandalized Bill Cosby. Tina Fey and Alec Baldwin paid tribute to Tracy Morgan, former cast member suffering through a long recuperation following a traffic accident. And in a selection of clips, viewers saw the ancient auditions of performers who did make the cast, and a few, Jim Carrey, Kevin Hart, who didn't. "I'm just glad it's over," was one of Michaels's comments a few days after the complex, spectacular, exhaustive, and exhausting show had aired. He was saluted at various points in the program, lampooned at others, and was called up onto the very crowded stage for good nights. And it was clear, however much he and the show he created have tried to avoid sentimentality over the decades, that even Michaels was fighting back tears. Afterward, at the Plaza Hotel, worlds collided in a way that only Michaels could probably engineer. With all due respect to Vanity Fair's fabled Oscar bashes, no one else could have summoned the array of musicians, comedians, actors, politicians, and corporate big shots that Michaels brought together that night. Music was in the center ring, starting with Dan Aykroyd summoning on stage the likes of Paul McCartney, Jimmy Buffett, Taylor Swift, Debbie Harry, Miley Cyrus, Ariana Grande, the B-52s, and Michael Bolton. That was hardly that. Jimmy Fallon later called on Prince to take the stage and bring the evening to the proverbial next level. What was being celebrated that night was a phenomenon that, through the endlessly morphing and recharging organism that Michaels had created, had made not only television history, but also played a role in the political and social direction of the nation. Born in an age dominated by 3 TV networks and a smattering of independent stations, Saturday Night Live had survived into the Internet era and was still rolling powerfully along. The SNL special drew an impressive 26.5 million viewers, according to Nielsen ratings, ranking it as the most-watched NBC entertainment program in a decade, and also setting a record, according to Entertainment Weekly, for the largest number of tweets ever prompted by a single program, 9.1 million people interacting via 1.3 million tweets by the Nielsen social count. It would be all but inarguable to declare the night not only a success, but also a milestone. One had to concede, considering the innumerable earthquakes and sea changes that had already occurred in American media, and all the others undoubtedly lurking in the future, that no, there would never be anything like this again. No, not ever. Preface to the 40th Anniversary Edition. In the 12 years since the paperback edition of Live from New York was published, Saturday Night Live has gone through many changes, as have we all. 28 cast members have been hired, 26 have left. Some departed for sitcoms or movies, others simply vanished from the public eye. There have been uproars, embarrassments, firings, budget cuts, a writer's strike that nearly derailed an entire season, and the construction of a new stage in Studio 8H. Women anchored Weekend Update and played a hugely prominent role in a presidential election. This new expanded edition of LFNY is meant to chronicle those changes and others, help mark the show's 40th anniversary, and document further its lasting imprint on American culture. After 39 seasons, this much is still true. Through triumphs and troubles, through incomparably memorable moments and fitful flirts with mediocrity, Saturday Night Live marches on as the most successful comedy show in the history of television. As with previous editions of this book, here we endeavor to write history through commentary and reminiscences from the show's cast members, hosts, and writers, this time including those who have been part of the show since the original book was published. We originally conceived LFNY as a book of record, and we welcome the chance to make that a living record, an illumination, we hope, for those who have lived their entire lives within the time frame of the show, and for those old enough to remember its first tumultuous years. One consistency through the decades, despite all the changes and upheaval, is that Saturday Night Live still hews to tradition. It began as and remains the expression of primarily one man. Lorne Michaels, the creator and executive producer, who, except for a 5-year hiatus during which others ran the show, hasn't missed a performance. He is the guiding spirit, and many of the standards he championed in the beginning are still evident in each subsequent iteration. So even when its content may be sophomoric or semi-smutty, Saturday Night Live continues to reflect its old established values. No canned laughter, no fake breakups by cast members, stringent technical standards. Indeed, one of the most common refrains from hosts involves awe at how expertly and impressively the machinery of SNL operates. Live television has no margin for error. As a result, even in its own middle age, and with many cable channels now proclaiming themselves as major players in the comedy business, Michaels' creation stands out. It has, let's face it, a better pedigree than do pretenders to the throne, and beneath the ballyhoo and profits, it evinces a palpable sense of purpose, something rare for commercial television. You don't get to be 40 without a little paranoia. SNL has always tried to stay ahead or at least abreast of industry developments, repackaging material for cast member best-of home video releases, DVD boxed sets, network specials, and exposure on Hulu and other internet sites. In the past decade, though, Saturday Night Live has managed even to co-opt candidates for its own replacement. Former cast member Andy Samberg, along with writers Jorma Taccone and Akiva Schaffer, convinced Michaels to feature weekly digital shorts on the program, just as YouTube was becoming part of America's daily routine. More people now see SNL's digital shorts on computers than they do when watching the show itself on Saturday night. Of course, that digital ecosystem has put the show under a brighter and arguably harsher spotlight than ever, with each episode being analyzed and pounced upon by the Internet's cacophonous chorus of opinionators. The show has ridden a roller coaster of ups and downs, sometimes making news as well as commenting on it, or doing both at the same time. A sketch that kills can go viral now in a flash and be seen by millions who no longer watch the show. As a result, SNL has had to face, from Twitter and elsewhere, a huge array of would-be satirists and commentators. The same Internet that supplies perpetual criticism for SNL supplies perpetual competition for it, with a seemingly infinite array of satirical or pseudo-satirical voices clamoring for attention. Competition has become even fiercer, especially against the bottomless pits of programming on cable and satellite television. Cable stars like Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert try to do nightly what SNL does weekly on the update desk, making it even harder for SNL writers and performers not only to be funny, but also to say something distinctive and unique about the week's news and pop culture parade. To his credit, and even though there has sometimes seemed to be a lag between criticisms of the show and attempts to address them, Michaels has remained vigilant in maintaining the show's prominence in the zeitgeist and in the increasingly hasty march of time. He and the writers, producers, and performers under him tried desperately each week to keep the show fresh and relevant. Obviously, currency is the show's most important single attribute. NBC has exploited the success of SNL at every opportunity. Its reruns often plug holes in the NBC schedule and are licensed to play on cable channels, some partly owned by NBC. Michaels's own domain and wealth have vastly expanded. With the ascendancies of Jimmy Fallon to The Tonight Show and Seth Meyers to Late Night, Michaels became executive producer and guardian angel of NBC's entire late-night schedule, Monday through Saturday. The flagship broadcast, Saturday Night Live, has developed into a relatively dependable audience delivery device, so much so that it has become common for SNL, where the resident troupe used to be self-mockingly called the not-ready-for-primetime players, to score higher Nielsen ratings than any show in NBC's Saturday primetime lineup. Of course, that's attributable not just to SNL doing well, but also, in the 1,000-channel universe, to everybody else being in the dumps, or almost in the dumps. The size of the pie stays relatively the same, but the slices grow even smaller. The audience now must be divided among new channels, new networks, and new media. Can there be anything left, meanwhile, of SNL's original rebellious maverick swagger? Can SNL continue to satirize what it has arguably become? Maybe these worries are spurious, perhaps as irrelevant as some claim the show has now become. But week after week and year after year, perpetually replenished with new young talent who claim Studio 8H for their own, Saturday Night Live continues to push on, and the man whose name remains first in the credits at the end of each show has vowed to stay there as long as he lives. Michaels still manages to identify with the audaciousness and irreverence that have always been vital to the show's DNA. For us, this journey has proved a hilarious pleasure at times and a daunting challenge at other times. But always, more than anything else, it has been an honor. No kidding. James Andrew Miller and Tom Shales. Prologue. Saturday Night Live is more than a television show. Since its premiere in 1975, it has served as a trendsetter in American humor and had a remarkable effect on American mores, manners, music, politics, and even fashion. It can't be said that there'd never been anything like it in TV history, because one of its bold strokes was reviving a format as old as television itself. In fact, older. The variety show, with music and comedy sketches intermixed. Though the basic form wasn't entirely new, the content was, and so were the show's attitude and approach and collective mindset. Tea had been around for centuries, after all, but the notion of throwing mass quantities into Boston Harbor was new. It was revolutionary. So was Saturday Night Live. The people who own and run commercial television networks don't put a show on the air because they imagine it will break bravely with tradition, or set grand new aesthetic standards, or stretch the boundaries of the medium, or for any reason whatsoever, other than to make money. Saturday Night Live wasn't created because NBC executives yearned to introduce something new and bold into the television bloodstream or the American mainstream. It came to be because Johnny Carson wanted the network to stop airing reruns of his Tonight Show on weekends. For years, NBC's affiliated stations had been given the choice of slotting the best of Carson late on Saturday or Sunday nights, or neither. One fine day in 1974, Carson told NBC to yank them all together. He wanted to air reruns on weeknights to give himself more time off. NBC brass had the choice of returning the weekend time to local stations, and thereby kissing a chunk of ad revenue goodbye, or trying to fill the time slot with other programming. And so the word went forth from network president Herbert Schlosser, develop a new late-night show for Saturday. In 1974, when the decision to annex late Saturday nights was made, nobody knew what was coming. Ideas that circulated among NBC executives included a weekly variety show hosted by impressionist Rich Little, then under contract to the network. Somebody suggested Linda Ronstadt as co-star. Even bland Bert Convy, actor and game show host, was considered. But all those cockeyed notions were trashed when a brilliant and ambitious young writer from Canada, born Lorne Lipowitz, was named executive producer of the new show. He'd made a name for himself with his work on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and a few Lily Tomlin specials, and, before leaving Canada, with a fanciful film about failure in the annual hockey puck crop. His vision would turn TV on its head, turn TV on itself, and prevail for decades to come, even during a few years in which he himself was in absentia. The man Herb Schlosser took a chance on, Lorne Michaels, then crossing the Great Divide into 30, gave NBC much, much more than it had bargained for, probably more than it wanted. An adventurous, live, topical satire series that, had executives and advertisers known of its form and content in advance, might never have seen the light of night. NBC's Saturday Night, as it was originally called, would be the television generation's own television show, its first. Except in superficial ways, it was unlike anything else then on the air, and it would be years before flummoxed rivals would even try to imitate it. From the ground up, it was built to be new, unusual, arresting, surprising, and attractive to baby boomers, the largest generation in American history. In the decades to come, the success of Saturday Night Live sparked a renaissance in topical, satirical, and political humor, both on television and off it, launched the careers of innumerable new talents who might otherwise have had little hope of appearing on network TV, including some who'd had little interest in it, hugely expanded the parameters of what was acceptable material on the air, bringing it much closer to the realities of everyday American life, and helped bestow upon the comedy elite the hip, mythic status that rock stars had long enjoyed. And it made a nation laugh even when it hurt. During its earliest weeks on the air, celebrity hosts and musical acts were the essence of the program. As weeks went by, the show's repertory company of young comedy players, recruited mostly from improvisational troupes in a few major cities, got more time on the air. Even before the original cast left, the show itself had become the star and a new American institution, a kind of keepsake to be handed down from generation to generation, both by the performers who served time in its stock company, and by the audience that is perpetually replenished as new legions of viewers come of age. All that and more, because Johnny wanted additional time off. At first skeptical about the new show, he was later openly appalled by some of its more outrageous gags. Foremost example, an aged comic known as Professor Backwards drowned in the ocean, Chevy Chase reported on SNL's Weekend Update, because onlookers ignored his desperate cries of, "Play, play." But the king of late night, quite the icon himself, eventually came to terms with the show, and friendly terms with Chase. Michaels said he annually invited Carson to guest host as a goodwill gesture, but was just as annually turned down. Lorne Michaels propelled TV forward partly by returning to its origins, his philosophy tidily embodied in the 7 words that exuberantly, and somehow threateningly, open each edition. Live from New York, it's Saturday night. Though it blazed new trails in the area of what could be said and done on TV, and initially made the censors batty and sponsors skittish, Saturday Night Live always had its roots showing. The early golden days of live TV from New York, the days of Studio One, and, more relevantly, Your Show of Shows, and Caesar's Hour with Sid Caesar and his troupe. The audience at home watched and laughed, thrillingly aware that this is happening now, and that there was thus an element of daring and peril to what otherwise amounted to mere entertainment. The story of Saturday Night Live is the story of the people who made it work, people there at the beginning, people who passed through as if attending some rarefied college of comedic arts, craftspeople and technicians as well as actors and comics and musicians. They and the show weathered many a storm along the way. The tragic premature deaths of cast members, drug abuse among the performers and writers, temper tantrums, office romances, and a near-fatal stumble when, 5 years into the run, someone underqualified took over as producer. There was also Michaels' own pratfall when he returned after a long absence with a casting concept that largely bombed, and in more recent times, an anthrax scare that had the entire cast evacuating 30 Rockefeller Center, the show's longtime home, on a frightening Friday in the terrorist year of 2001. As executive producer for most of its nearly 3 decades, Michaels has had to contend with virtually every sin the flesh is heir to, among his cast members as well as with his own fallibilities. He was a father figure even at the beginning, when he was only a wee bit older than the rest of them, and that continues now that he is twice the age of many of those who work for him, and plays host to surviving members of the original cast who bring teenage sons and daughters to see the show in person. He watched as 2 of his brightest comedy stars died of drug abuse, saw others come perilously close, and has had to deal with the grimness of a disproportionately high mortality rate overall. There have been cast members who drank too much, snorted coke too much, freebased too much, God knows what else too much. A writer recalls walking into an office and finding 3 members of one of the world's most famous rock bands shooting heroin into their veins before a show. One brilliant but insecure member of a recent cast slashed himself with razor blades during bouts of severe depression. Talent may itself be a form of neurosis. It usually comes with troubles attached. To those who work on the show, success and failure become close to matters of life and death. It's all there in the argot. A good joke kills, while a bad sketch dies. Having an audience crushed by material is devoutly to be wished. Many a sketch will kill at dress, meaning get big laughs at the dress rehearsal staged in front of a separate audience a few hours before the real show, only to die on air when it's the show for real. Among Michaels' nemeses over the years have been network censors, less conspicuous now but a constant source of friction at the outset, network executives who hated the program or wanted to produce it themselves, hosts who panicked at the last minute and wanted to bolt, or who canceled just before their week's exhilarating ordeal was about to begin, and an uncountable number of protests and condemnations from special interest groups offended by this sketch or that portrayal or a news item on Weekend Update, or the way a seemingly imperiled pig squealed during a sketch about a TV animal show. Even in its maturity, if that state was ever actually reached, the show remained a troubled child. Brandon Tartikoff, for years NBC's much-loved Uber programmer, reluctantly canceled the series in the mid-1980s, only to give it an 11th-hour reprieve. Essentially, the warden made the fateful last-minute phone call to himself. The show made stars of unknowns and superstars of stars. There were also those who entered anonymous and left the same way. Some were made famous, some were made bitter, some were made rich. Some found nirvana and others a living hell. They never really knew going through those portals how or if they would be changed as a result. But they virtually all had one thing in common, even if they had joined the show simply because they needed work and liked to eat. It was much more than a job. They were the chosen because it was the chosen. They could look down on people working even on the most successful primetime sitcoms or dramas, because Saturday Night Live was something entirely unto itself, a towering edifice on the landscape, a place of wonder and magic, a socio-political phenomenon. With the arrival of SNL, the TV generation, at least for 90 minutes a week, could see television not just as a window on the past or a display case for the fading fantasy figures of their fathers and mothers, but as a mirror. A warped funhouse mirror, perhaps, but a mirror just the same, one reflecting their own sensibilities, values, and philosophies. Television, which had shown them the world, had heretofore neglected to show them themselves. When Saturday Night Live began, its competition was mostly local programming, syndicated shows and old movies, since ABC and CBS, then the only other networks, went dark late Saturday nights. Today, SNL faces an onslaught of competition in its time period from dozens of
Sample complete. Ready to continue?